Welcome to the Story Learning Podcast, regular doses of language learning tips and motivation to help you become fluent in any language. With me, Olly Richards. For language programs, books, free resources, and much more, visit StoryLearning.com.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the show. Thank you so much for listening. This is episode 40 already. Well, we're nearly at a half century of episodes. It's quite exciting. And today what I'd like to do is talk about a question that actually came up in a Facebook group recently about reading books and what kind of books are the best to read if you're going to read something in a foreign language. Because I just published a blog post recently on the blog called How to Read Effectively in a Foreign Language, and I gave all of this, all of my ideas about how to actually read effectively. You know, how do you avoid getting overwhelmed by really difficult books? But then the obvious question came up, well, what kind of books should I be reading? And it was really interesting because I've thought about this a lot before and I've heard other people talk about it, but it hasn't really been written about so much. And so I thought I'd offer my thoughts on this. And so the question is basically, I'd like to try my hand at reading a book. I think the guy who asked it was learning Italian. And he just fancies reading a book. He thinks it would be a good idea, something he'd like to do, a challenge he'd like to take on. But the question is obviously, what kind of book should I read? And, when you always hear this advice from people, which is, you should read children's books. Because children's books are easy, because they're meant for kids, so they must be easy, right? But in fact, there's lots of problems with children's books. And the first of which is that they're actually intended for kids. And so, if you're someone who has kids and maybe reads a lot with his or her kids, then, that you might find yourself relating to it a bit more, so you might actually be able to enjoy it in that sense. But I think for most of us listening, we don't read children's books in our own language, and so if you try to read children's books in your target language, then you're just doing something unnatural for yourself, and you're going to get bored very, very quickly. The other thing about children's books is that they tend to have quite unusual and low frequency vocabulary. If anyone has ever recommended to you before, you should read Harry Potter in your target language, well, you may well have read Harry Potter in English or in your native language, but do you really need to learn words for like frogs and wizards and Hogwarts and all I mean, I haven't actually read them, but I've seen clips of movies here and there. There's all kinds of weird stuff to do with wizards and things that you really don't need to know, and you're going to spend a lot of time learning vocabulary that you really don't need. And so, in general, I think children's books are something that you should probably avoid unless you're particularly drawn to them or attracted to them. So, in that case, so if we're not reading children's books, then what other books are we going to read? Well, there's a few options. The first of which is graded readers, and graded readers are books that have been simplified for the benefit of a language learner. And there are pros and cons to these. The big con is that they are not 100% natural language, and so they can be criticized for that. However, if you're just getting started, graded readers can be a fantastic way to start off. And when I started learning Japanese, graded readers were really useful for me. And what I would say is read graded readers, but don't get parallel text. You know those books where you have like the English on one side and the Japanese on the other side or something? I recommend not using those if you are at a lower level. They can be quite useful at a very higher level so that you can actually start to read, real, genuine native speaker stuff. But I think for most people, it's best not to do that because it's just too easy. You're reading in the target language, and all you have to do is look over on the other side of the page, and you've got the English translation. And it's too easy. It takes all of the struggle out of it, and it doesn't encourage the kind of skills that we want in reading, which is to kind of keep going and to learn to try to understand the plot, even if you don't understand every word. So steer clear of parallel texts. Non-fiction books tend to be the most approachable in a foreign language. Okay, so non-fiction books, always the shorter, the better. But if you can find a non-fiction book on a topic that really interests you, this is probably going to be your best bet. Okay, so it might be a biography, it might be a how-to book or a self-help book or something like that. But non-fiction books tend to be written in a much more straightforward language. If you're writing a novel, you use all kinds of flowery language to entertain the reader, but non-fiction stuff is much more straightforward. So think about the last non-fiction book you read in your mother tongue, and then just try to find that same book in your target language. It's going to be much easier than reading a novel. But if you would like to read a novel, then I suggest starting with any book that you've already read in your mother tongue and get the translated copy in your target language. Okay, so for example, if you really want to read Harry Potter, then get a Harry Potter book that you have already read in English or any other language, and then get the translated version in the language that you're learning. And that has a very powerful effect because you already know what happens in the story. You already know the characters, the plots, you're familiar with what happens. So when you come to read in your target language, there's not so much unknown stuff going on. You're much more familiar with everything, and that's going to help you read between the lines, make sense of words and grammar that you don't quite understand. Okay. The other thing is, if you've got it's really important when you're reading that you get something that you enjoy and that you're going to like, because the big problem with reading books is that they're really long and they can overwhelm you, and so you've got to find something that you like. So I think the first thing that I would do is, if I was back home in London, I would probably go to something like the Big Waterstones bookshop in Piccadilly, or Foyles on Shaftesbury Avenue, and just spend some time browsing through the foreign language books there. If I was learning Italian, I'd go and look at all the books in Italian, try to just look and see what's there, find something that interests me, and if something really stands out and captures my attention, just go with that. And then if you might not be a book person, and if you're not a book person, that's fine, because there's lots of other things that you could do as well. There's so many websites out there with or newspapers or whatever it may be. There's one website in particular that's really cool, which is called Project Syndicate, and Project Syndicate is basically, it collates opinion pieces from newspapers around the world and translates them into different languages. So you can look at the English version of an article and then read the French version, for example. And so this really helps to kind of springboard off another language to help you understand the language that you're reading. So that can be a really, really good thing to do as well. I also wanted to mention a couple of tips mentioned by Judith Mayer, who is a fantastic polyglot who has a website called learnlangs.com, and she was involved in this discussion on Facebook as well. And she mentioned a couple of things I hadn't thought of that were really, really useful. And the first of which is, she says that crime stories, romance stories, autobiographies, and travel stories tend to be easier to read as well. And that makes a lot of sense, because I'm not sure exactly why crime stories or romance stories would be easier, but certainly the autobiographies and the travel stories, that would be much more straightforward, right? So she recommends those as genres of books to read. She also says that translated books are easier than original ones, and this is really interesting because it kind of makes sense, doesn't it? If you're the author in the original language, you draw on everything you can, all the different resources and imagery, nuance in the language to make your point, right? But I guess a translator should, in theory, do the same thing, shouldn't they? They should try to kind of convey the essence of what's being said in the target language. But it stands to reason that you can't always translate all of the nuance from one language to another. So it makes sense that a translated book would be easier than the original one. So that's something to think about as well. And she also mentioned The Little Prince, which I kicked myself when I saw, because I've got The Little Prince. I'm sure everyone knows The Little Prince. If you don't, again, I'll put links to all of this stuff on the show notes, which you can find at iwillteachyoualanguage.com/episode 40. And The Little Prince is just one of those classic books. It's short, it's life affirming, it's wonderful, great illustrations as well. And I must have read The Little Prince in at least 5 or 6 languages, and it's for all those reasons it's a wonderful book to read, and it's very approachable and very short. So yeah, if you're looking for something to start off with, then The Little Prince as well would be a great way to start. So yeah, that's all I wanted to talk about. I hope that's given you a few ideas for what you could try to read in case you fancy reading something, because reading is such a huge thing. It gives you more time with the language. It gives you the chance to explore it in more depth without the pressure of having to speak. Speaking is really high pressure. When you're talking with a native speaker, you don't have much room for error. You've got to be really on top of your game. But reading just gives you the chance to explore the language in more depth. So I really encourage you to read. And I've just published an article on the blog, actually, which is called How to Read Effectively in a Foreign Language. Again, I'll put that in the show notes. I'd also like to mention a great video of a talk that I mentioned. Judith Mayer earlier. She runs and organizes the Polyglot gatherings in Berlin every year. And in the first gathering last year, she did a fantastic talk called Matching Methods and Goals in Language Learning. And she talked about how to take your goals, what you want to achieve, and then what method is going to help you get there the best. And in that, she talks about this topic of reading and which are the best kind of things to read in order to reach your goals. So this is a resource I'd like to leave you with. It's a great talk. It was filmed. It's on YouTube, and I've put the link in the show notes, which again you can find at iwillteachyoualanguage.com/episode 40. So I hope that's helpful for any of you who do like reading. I've become increasingly aware recently that a lot of people that listen to this show and that read the blog are maybe not interested in speaking, and in fact reading is the thing that they are really most interested in. I had an interesting conversation with a guy the other day who said, look, Olly, I don't really care about speaking. All I want to do is read in Russian. He was learning Russian, and he said, reading literature in Russian is really my main goal. And it's fantastic. I love that kind of clarity over what you like to do. So I hope that's helpful, and thanks so much for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode of the podcast.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. And here at Story Learning, everything that I do is powered by stories, whether that's writing books, teaching lessons, crafting courses. My mission is to help everyone succeed at learning a new language through the power of story. And we now have comprehensive language courses in over 15 languages, from Spanish to French, Korean to Japanese, and across all levels from beginner to mastery. And you can take a 7-day free trial of any of these programs by visiting storylearning.com/courses. I've poured my heart and soul into creating these courses over the last 10 or so years, and we've helped tens of thousands of new students achieve their dreams of learning a new language, all through the power of story. So go ahead and take a free trial. There's no commitment. You can try out our method for free. See if this can also be the breakthrough for you that it's been for so many other people. storylearning.com/courses.